guys. Welcome back to Stronger. We're so happy to be with you again today. And we hope that you've been enjoying this past, 9 weeks, but this week in particular, as we've been kind of recapping these 5 tests that Pastor Nelson had talked about on Sunday, that Daniel had really just gone through and just nailed every one of them, and how we can incorporate that into our lives to build up an immovable faith, which as believers, I think that should really be a goal of ours, is how to strengthen our faith walk and be immovable no matter what time you're in or what you're going through. So tonight we're going to cover another one of these tests, and as you can see, it's just Jody and I here, so we're hoping that you will enjoy kind of what we have to bring to the table tonight. So we're going to go, this week we've already covered Daniel having these personal boundaries and the importance of personal boundaries. And we covered personal crises and how Daniel really handled these crises with tact and wisdom, because he had this 100% confidence in his God and who God is and what God was doing in his life. And I don't know about you, but I was really encouraged by that. And just, I can picture it in my own life and what that gripping panic feels like.
Oh, yes.
And just how that can be so different when our confidence is in God.
Yeah, and the trust that he had, and the public trust that Daniel had, that people had with Daniel, with his God. And I think that's going to be a really cool connection point today.
That's right. Yeah. So as Jody mentioned, we're going to be talking about public trust in this episode. And we're kind of focusing on Daniel 4 here, where King Nebuchadnezzar has the second dream, and it's rocked him again. And I don't know, this guy seems to have a lot of crazy dreams. So he has this dream, and he is shaken, and he needs an interpretation because he knows that this is more than just your run-of-the-mill dream. He knows that this is going to be something really crazy. And so in Daniel 4, verse 8, this is Nebuchadnezzar again, he just says, "Finally, Daniel came into my presence, and I told him the dream." And it's this finally that Nelson had talked about on Sunday, and that we're going to kind of talk about, is being that finally guy. Like you can almost just tell in this finally that Nebuchadnezzar just breathes this sigh of relief because Daniel is there, and he just knows he's going to get the word he needs. He's going to get the word of God spoken through Daniel. He just feels this relief because of Daniel, and this is that public trust that we talked about.
And we've all been in those moments where you're going through something and you have to talk to somebody, and you're going through this crisis and you're confused, and all of a sudden, last night I was reading the same story and my Bible said, "At last." That at last you're here. And it's this relief of this, this is the person that can help me because of who he is with God.
That's right. And they knew, Nebuchadnezzar knew who Daniel was with God. Nebuchadnezzar knew that Daniel was his finally guy because Daniel was super clear on his personal boundaries. Daniel was super clear in dealing with crisis with wisdom and tact. And so even though these were personal things that Daniel had been working on, him and God, this translated to this public trust because everyone knew. So this king, this great and mighty king who has just been shaken to his core, can say, "Oh, alas, I know who Daniel is. I know what I'm getting here. I know his faith is not gray. It is very clear." And finally, Daniel's here.
And as I was praying about this last night and, going through this story again, and driving here this morning, God gave me an old story that really popped into my head this morning, and I went, and it was probably the most major crisis I've gone through as that vehicle that's coming at you 100 miles an hour, and what do you do?
Right.
So myself and my best friend and my dad's best friend, we were going down this river that we go down every year, and we didn't do our homework, and we ended up going through a log jam through it. And I just remember right before this fear, we came around the corner and this fear just came upon me going, we're going to die. And then the Holy Spirit just took over, and I just felt nothing but just this peace, and I just prayed loudly, I guess, and God just got us through this. We still went through the logjam. But afterwards, there was this trust. My best friend who didn't know God before, all of a sudden she's like, it was a miracle. She just kept saying it was a miracle. It was a miracle. It was all about God. It was you prayed so hard, and it was just this, I just popped into my head because that crisis and that peace that only comes from God when you're in that crisis, but then how it filters out to receive that trust, all of a sudden it's like, God did this,
And then you can be that finally guy for the people that experienced that with you. That was what they drew from it, which is that's a great story to tie to how Daniel had these great boundaries and then had handled these crises and how he became that person who had that public trust.
Yeah. It's fine. You're finally here. You know, it's like now we're going to get some answers, and how we handle our public trust is huge in how people see us.
Absolutely.
And it goes kind of into the public courage that Pastor Nelson talks about, and the courage it took Daniel to face Belshazzar, say his name
Good job.
right.
Takes a little tongue-tying to get through these names.
I am tongue-tied. Facing him and that confrontation, that courage, that public courage, and he brought him in and saying, if you can, this hand is on the wall and you're writing all this stuff, but. And his, the queen said, "This is the guy. Here's the guy."
Right.
She thought he's finally here, and he didn't know.
Right.
He didn't actually know he was the guy yet. And so having that courage to confront and say, "I don't want your stuff."
Yes, that's right. So that was his next test, right? Was the public courage.
It was,
and as you mentioned, and so that goes into chapter 5, as Jody had mentioned, the Belshazzar writing on the wall, and just as a recap, like Belshazzar was just he was Neb's son, and he was so rebellious, right? Like it wasn't just that he had this opening in his heart like Neb did, where God could speak into it. No, he was making a mockery of faith. He had seen and had the benefit of watching Nebuchadnezzar's transformation and humbling by Daniel's God, who became Nebuchadnezzar's God. And he was just making a mockery of the faith. And so this writing on the wall comes up, and it causes Belshazzar great panic and fear, and as Pastor Nelson mentioned on Sunday, a loosening of the bowels. And so he's in this panic moment, this crisis moment. And the queen says, "Hey, there's a guy. There's a guy."
Yeah.
And so we're just going to go to that verse in Daniel 5:11, where the queen says to Belshazzar in this great moment of panic, "There's a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners." So Daniel had, and we've talked about this before, Daniel had this incredible reputation because of his boundaries, because of his wisdom and tact and crisis, because of this public trust. He had this reputation that although it seems as though Belshazzar didn't have Daniel serving in his court during his time, there was still this reputation there. Hey, there's this guy. And, I don't know about you, but I want people to say that about me. Hey, there's this lady. Hey, I know you're in crisis. There's this person that I know you're going to have. And it's not because of my own wisdom. It's because of God speaking and working through me, and just that consistency of what God's done in my life, lived out through my obedience, that someone can say, there's this girl.
Absolutely. And there's such peer pressure on us in the world to follow what the crowd is, when this public panic of what is being said on your social media, through
Yes.
everything, honestly. And there's this pressure to just follow.
And it takes courage
It does.
to
To say
stand
no.
up.
Yeah.
And so, and you had made reference to this earlier, Daniel's moment of great courage in this when he is brought before this king. I mean, Daniel's had a lot of moments of great courage.
Yeah.
But then in 5:17, we find out that Daniel has just been offered all this power and
Yeah.
royalty and gifts. This room is full of nobles and people who have wanted this. They've lived for this. They want all these things that are being offered to Daniel if he
Yeah.
interprets this dream. And this strong statement of courage comes in 5:17, where Daniel says, you may keep the gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I'll read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. To throw that back to him and just say, this means nothing to me.
Yeah.
My focus is on God, is on the kingdom of heaven, is on eternity. And when we can keep our focus on those things, I believe that the peer pressure that we're facing, and no matter what your age, right? I know Nelson made reference to this on Sunday, that the youth, we often, can tie together with peer pressure. But man, I face it all the time.
Yeah,
I
we
face it all the time. It just, in any situation, even if it's just how you handle your social media, I face it all the time. But to keep your eyes focused on what is eternal allows you to just bring it into this public courage place, much like Daniel, and be able to say, you know what? I don't need your things, or my value isn't here. I'm not trying to manipulate a situation in order to gain access to this. My focus is on God, and people will see that. It comes in these decisions you make in your private time and publicly, but people see this.
They do, and how you act publicly is so huge, and that obedience that you have actually is what gives you that public courage to be able to stand up, and there's an authority that you get through Christ when you are like a Daniel and you follow all of the boundaries, and you do well with crisis, and you do well with the trust that he's giving you, because once you've gone, then you have this amazing foundation of all of these things. You are able to have that courage because it's built in you. It's just part of your DNA.
That's right. And I love how this just all ties back to obedience. And I think that's what we just close with tonight, guys, is these tests and these trusts, they all break down to Daniel's obedience in these little and big things. And what I'm learning through this, what I'm growing to understand, is it's not too late to start today. Today is a new day, and we have God's grace and his mercy. And if we just humble ourselves and ask him to A, forgive us, and B, to just make these things clear to us and strengthen us and help us, and we just start saying yes today, yes God, and be obedient in the big and small things, this immovable faith is going to be building and building. These characteristics, these tests that we're all going to face, will keep building and growing in strength to result in a faith like Daniel's. So we just want to leave you with that tonight, and thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to tuning in with you tomorrow. Thank you so much. God bless.